West Ham are a club in crisis at the moment. There's no other way of describing it. I know it. You know it. The board seem to know it because we've seen them since yesterday come out in some sort of a panicked reaction. Maybe Karren Brady was due to appear on TalkSport this morning anyway. But it seems like it was a panicked reaction. There's other quotes coming from the club which would point towards a panicked reaction. And the messaging that's come from the club is incredibly important. Messaging that comes from anyone is important. This is a quote from the very top level at the club. Now, it's been attributed to Brady, but it's also been attributed to Sullivan. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which one it is. Maybe both of them. We are on the floor. We need something. My goodness. We are on the floor. We need something. Those are really strong words. Really strong words. And they're words that we really shouldn't ever be using. We shouldn't need to. They're probably accurate. We are on the floor and we do need something. What I hate about this is it's come from the very top of the club and they are acting surprised. As if they have nothing to do with it. As if they're somehow going to have to scramble around and find something, to use their words, to fix what is clearly wrong. Go back to the last transfer window. We were linked with, do you know what? I actually forget the guy's name now. But he was a young Dutch midfielder. He had plenty of pace. We put in a £15 million bid. I think he went to one of the Red Bull clubs, actually, in the end. And it was told to us by the club and by club insiders and leaked stuff and all the rest of it that we were desperate need of pace and energy in midfield. So why are we surprised now? This is crazy. It's very most basic level. Why are we surprised that this is happening? When you allow your competitors, and I mean all of them, pick a club in the Premier League, but when you allow your competitors to recruit better than you for both coaches and players, why would you then be surprised that they overtake you? That just doesn't make any sense at all. For too long, this club have been lazy and they've rested on their laurels. That it was somehow enough just to carry on as they were. As I've said repeatedly, we're 20 years behind. I don't think that too much has changed probably since the same ownership group owned Birmingham. But football has moved on hugely. I think one of the most damning things that's happened, I remember after the Burnley, what should we call it? The Burnley unrest, where, you know, you had the pitch invasion, you had people screaming up at the director's box, and David Sullivan was sat there. He was frozen. And the security guards, a whole cordon had sort of stopped people getting towards him. You felt like fans wanted to get towards him. I was there that day. And then shortly afterwards, we played Watford. And just before the Watford game, I remember being down the boats, and then David Sullivan had either gone on to TalkSport or something. I don't know. He'd gone on to Sky News, whatever it was. And he had said that the club was going to need a massive overhaul, that we were going to get a whole new video data analytics department and do all this stuff which sounds like it was an attempt at modernisation. That was a reaction to what happened at Burnley. He didn't have his reaction on the day. He was frozen. But he knew that things had gone perhaps too far and he needed to change. I'm not sure if we ever did that video data analytics department. What I do know is we have had several opportunities to change, and we've tried it. So we bring in Pellegrini, we bring in Huselos, and they develop a scouting system, and that gets thrown out. And then we bring in, you know, whoever, Tony Henry, and that gets thrown out for obvious reasons. We bring in Rob Newman and David Moyes, and that gets thrown out. We bring in Tim Stight, and that doesn't work. That gets thrown out. We're constantly restarting. So we never actually stick to anything, and because of that, we never enjoy the harvest of the seeds that we've sown. Because what we do is we to use a farming analogy, I guess we sow the seeds, and before they've been allowed to grow, we we plough up the field again and plant some more seeds. This is terrible in terms of forward planning, and what this smacks of is a complete and utter lack of foresight. There's a direction there, but the direction changes completely. But it lacks foresight, and it lacks a determination and a real belief that actually what you're doing and what your end goal is, and to go from point A to point B and see it through. We don't see anything through. We keep on throwing out new ideas and then bringing in furthermore new ideas, and because of that we're basically a team and a club without a philosophy, and that's because we don't have a belief. Because if you don't have a core belief, then you can't have a philosophy. And the reason for that is it is enough for us just to be. It's enough for us just to survive. There is no quest to thrive. There is no quest to excel. It's just to be there and be in the Premier League. And that's going to be massively under threat now. And just going on what I said about the way that the way that the club are disorganised, the way that you look at clubs like Bournemouth, and they're a really good example. They're probably not the best example. Probably Brighton are of that. Clubs that were, when this board of directors took over, or this ownership group, these clubs were lower than us in the football pyramid significantly. Moving to the Olympic Stadium was meant to herald a financial situation where we would be able to compete with the top clubs. That was what it was meant to do. It was meant to, on two things, it was meant to give us so many more fans that revenue coming through the turnstiles would allow us to compete at the top level. It was meant to be a big and attractive enough new development, because there was going to be, basically a gentrification of the surrounding area, because Stratford was going to basically become hip and fashionable. That was going to bring in its own income, and that was going to allow us then to attract better players, to have more money, and to compete with the guys that were bringing in more money than us, because the Premier League's all about money, obviously. It was never, ever, ever even remotely hinted at or contemplated that what might happen is lower league clubs would come up, and they just through their own philosophy and through organisation and through smart planning would be able to finish above us, even though they were generating less money. That's what's happening. West Ham, over the last few years, have generated more money up to a point, because Brighton, because they buy and sell so well, will be overtaking us at some point if they haven't done so already. But this is stuff they generate more money than us. This is the whole purpose of, by the way, of us being in the London Stadium, the Olympic Stadium. This is really the whole purpose of Karren Brady there. She is meant to be some shit-hot chief executive who is able to get these deals done, is meant to be, a bit of a marketing whiz. And not just me saying that, she's a business expert. She's Baroness Brady, Lady Brady. She's on The Apprentice as a business expert. That's what she does. Yet everybody else seems to be doing this stuff better than us. A lot is made of the West Ham training ground. A lot is made of it because there are a series of porter cabins there. What the other clubs have above and beyond what we have, it makes West Ham an embarrassment. There is just not the investment in the infrastructure of the club at all. Go back and look at the video that I did about Bournemouth's training ground, Bournemouth's training complex. It's outstanding. I said at the time, it looks like a spaceship. It's incredible. We have nothing close to it. We don't even own our own stadium. And the land and property that we do own, in terms of the training grounds, because we've got more than one, are not developed into state-of-the-art facilities. And actually, the land and the buildings that we do own, we're mortgaging against. We have a secured lending facility against them. In every respect, almost every respect, West Ham are being run on the cheap. But up until now, we've not done that with players. We've bought the players. We've stopped doing that. So you get this situation where the club are saying, we are on the floor. We need something. the environment in which West Ham took over the Olympic Stadium probably at that time would have allowed us to do okay, and maybe even did. Because the environment at the time meant that having a cheap rent on a stadium, there was some advantage to that because it probably allowed you to spend more money than other clubs who, number one, had to pay to build their own stadium, which we didn't have to do. And number two, to run a stadium, which costs money. So West Ham have our outgoings are a lot less. That there was an advantage to that at the time. But football's moved on. And I don't just mean the first start of the video was me talking about football moving on from a data analytics, a scouting point of view, a recruitment point of view. We're light years behind all the rest on that. But that's not the only way that football has moved on. Football has also moved on from the part that really, I think, say particularly Karren Brady is supposed to be an expert at from the business point of view because of financial fair play. And this is where we're suffering as well. It seems like we're just as far behind. And you've got to go and look. And I mention this because I did watch part of Karren Brady's interview on Talk Sport. But I had to stop because so much of what she said sounds hollow, and she wasn't challenged. I didn't feel she was challenged on the points that maybe us as West Ham fans would like to challenge her on. But when you look at Everton moving into their new stadium and the fact that they now have a naming rights sponsorship, which means they can do the naming rights in their stadium, which is going to give them an extra, I believe, 10 million a year, you start to realise actually West Ham's deal isn't quite so good now because, well, firstly, we can't do a naming rights deal on the stadium because if we could have done, we would have done it by now. Secondly, even if we do, the first 4 million goes to the stadium anyway because that was part of the deal because our rent is so low. We don't seem to have the forward-thinking data analytics and recruitment department that other clubs have that allows people like Brighton and their chairman Tony Bloom to identify top talent. We're no good at it. We are no good at this whatsoever. We cannot buy a midfielder for 5 or 10 million and turn him into a £100 million midfielder. That's just not something West Ham are capable of. But a lot of clubs are doing this now. You look at the money Bournemouth have just generated in terms of their player sales. It's amazing. That's all down to their recruitment, how good their recruitment is. Yet somehow, for some reason, even though we're losing out on this revenue from stadium sponsorship and also losing out on revenue because we're not organised enough in the way we buy and sell and recruit players, we still think we know it better, that maybe David Sullivan and Karren Brady know better than everybody else, these people. And it's quite damning. It's quite damning that somebody like Bill Foley, who is the chairman at Bournemouth, can come in and take one look at what's happening and do it far better than we can do it. West Ham don't really know what's going on as well. We don't follow the trends. So we look at something like Aston Villa selling their ladies' team back to themselves, and we don't do it. The reason they did that is because it's a loophole. It's a loophole that allows them to spend their own money. We don't want to spend our own money, which is why we don't do it. But I also think we don't recognise it. We're so far behind the times, almost in every metric and every facet of the club, probably bar youth development. We are behind it. We are behind the curve on everything. We are not an entity which notices new trends. We don't notice the way that football is manoeuvring. And if we react at all, we react very, very late. And by that point, football's then moved on. Again, I made this point. I said I'd do this video today because yesterday I just really wanted to focus on the game. So later on today, myself and Michael Levy Jr., we recorded the video last night. I'll put that up later today. So we'll watch. You can watch that tonight, which is again is a more of a reaction to the game. But I said I'd concentrate on the board in this video, and that's really what I'm doing. But in many respects, the football that we're seeing under Graham Potter mirrors what the club do. Basically, it appears to be behind the times. During Karren Brady's interview with TalkSport this morning, she spoke about Graham Potter being a modern manager. I don't think he is. I really don't. I think he was, but it doesn't feel like even he has really noticed the changes in football, because that style of football that he wants to play, and I'm not going to insult you by describing it, you know the style of football by now Graham Potter likes to play, because he's had half a season at West Ham. That's no longer it. In fact, I'll give you a quote from Pep Guardiola, who said about Bournemouth, the way Bournemouth play, Pep Guardiola said, that's the way the Premier League is now. That's the way the Premier League is now. What was modern and cutting edge 6 years ago, to pick a date out of thin air, is no longer cutting edge in anything, and particularly not football, where marginal gains, if you know that term, where marginal gains where you can pick up a percentage here or there on anything should be enough to see you through and beat the opposition. You cannot afford to lag behind, and we have lagged behind in every metric. We have lagged behind in terms of our recruitment, and not just in the way we recruit to buy and sell, but even just the recruitment for this season. It was the club who said we need an energetic midfielder. It was the club who said at the end of the last transfer window, at the end of the last season, that West Ham's priority positions were a striker, and basically, I'm using the phrase legs in midfield, but that's what I'm quite happy that I've paraphrased that relatively correctly. This hasn't happened, and no, I don't count Callum Wilson. So why are they surprised that this has happened? There's an inability to modernise, which means they need to step aside and let somebody else have a go. It's not just the competency, though. There's an inability to recognise what is happening. They are either incapable of doing what's needed, or they won't do it. And you look at these trends, you look at the way other clubs are forward-thinking in their ways to generate money and generate funds for themselves. We don't do it, we won't do it. And we are now using PSR as an excuse to hide behind, when actually there are ways around it, and we're not even at our PSR limit anyway. It's just being used as an excuse, and we're meant to swallow it. I do wonder what's going on at the top level of the club, and I mean with regard to Daniel Kretinsky and maybe Trip Smith. These people bought shares in West Ham as an investment, and as a big investment. They can't be enjoying what they're seeing. I don't think they're actually complicit in the mismanagement of the club, and to an extent, I would understand why Kretinsky is not involved, because Kretinsky tried to get involved once, and he insisted on a director of football, and that was Tim Stuyton. And so he would have seen his idea be implemented and then basically thrown out. And I don't just mean by the sacking of Tim Stuyton, I mean the fact that Tim Stuyton was sacked and not replaced. Clearly, there's enough evidence there to suggest that Kretinsky was concerned about how the club is running. So I do understand that he will not put any more of his money in, and I don't claim to fully understand his role with Sparta Prague. It may well mean that he cannot outright own West Ham. But if that's the case, then West Ham is still in need, really, of probably something approaching a hostile takeover. That's what it will take here. You're not going to be able to force Sullivan out. I've seen him sitting in the director's box. Hold on. Excuse me. There he is. I've seen him. Hello, mate. As the dog's come to see me. I've seen him sitting in a director's box when thousands of fans are flipping him the bird, right? And demanding that he leaves and he sells up. And he sat there staring. He's not going to do that. I don't even think he realises how incompetent the club is being run. I'll go back to those words. We are on the floor. We need something. There's an additional comment to that, which I've purposely left out at the start of the video because I wanted to concentrate on the state of the club. The second part of the comment is, sadly, the board can't just go out and buy players the manager and Carl don't want. That's the very start of the manager and Carl McCauley being thrown under the bus. And I just want to sort of make this point now. It's entirely possible that they're all useless. And one thing I don't ever find helpful when... This is how it always goes at West Ham, where we get to a point like this and people look for a pantomime villain. So it's either Sullivan or it's Stuyton or it's Moyes or it's either Lopetegui or it's Stuyton. Very rarely do I ever sort of read or hear, well, actually, maybe they're all shit. This is where we are here. It may well be that Potter is out of his depth. And quite possibly McCauley's out of his depth. Now, anyone that's been watching the channel for a long time, you will know that does not surprise me. Because he's never done this job, McCauley. It was always going to be difficult for him to get deals over the line. He's always going to be able to identify players because he was a data analyst. At Brighton, he was a data analyst. At Chelsea, he was a data analyst. He's never been in charge of a recruitment department. So it's not going to be beyond the realms of possibility to me to think they're no good either. But that's still the fault of the chairman for appointing them in the first place. If that is the case, you've merely elevated people to positions for which they're not qualified. Graham Potter's the manager at the moment. He's not a head coach. He's only ever been a head coach. He is the manager. The irony is we got rid of David Moyes because we didn't want a manager. We wanted a head coach. We've ended up with one anyway. Graham Potter is a head coach in a manager's role. And I'm far from convinced how good a head coach he is, by the way. And this is why this is not a binary situation. Karren McCauley is a data analyst who's been promoted to the role of head of recruitment. That is very much the fault of the board. And I do believe there's more than just on the board in terms of making these decisions. Make no mistake about it, there's more than just Karren Brady and David Sullivan. But they're the figureheads, and you're going to get that. And when you're going to go be making, interviews on TalkSport and stuff like that, you're going to be the one that gets spoken about. So that's really where it is. It does not inspire confidence when we say things like, it was very bad. We are on the floor. We need something. You heard last week we've got bids in. Really, what does that mean? Well, I guess it means we've got bids in, but, I believe we probably have, but it doesn't mean that they're good bids. It doesn't mean they're bids for good players, and it doesn't mean even if they are good players that they're competitive bids. They're just words saying we have got bids in. But listen to the words that they say. It's tough. It's hard to bring in better players than the ones we have. And when you see us getting thrashed 3-0 against Sunderland, and good luck to them. You know what? I think it's weird actually. I can't think of too many times I've lost as a West Ham fan, and then I actually found the opposition club quite endearing. I quite like them. I quite like Sunderland. But when you factor in that we have just lost 3-0 to a newly promoted side, and the club are saying we're finding it hard to buy better players than we already have, it's really important that you look at what's being said there. What is not being said is there are no players better than what we have. There are. They're saying we don't know, and we're finding it hard to sign them. That, and saying we are on the floor, we need something, is a declaration of incompetence. They don't mean it as such, but it is. That is a declaration of incompetence. West Ham are a club in crisis. And I am very, very certain about this. If it's not sorted out really quickly, we're going to go down. And I recorded a video with Michael earlier where we ended up having to re-record the video. But I recorded a video earlier with Michael yesterday. And he said the type of manager they'd probably go for would be Sean Dyche if we were in it. This would just... I could barely finish the sentence that he said there because it sounds so terrible, and the reason it sounds so terrible is it's indicative of everything we do, and it's indicative of everything we do wrong. We have no foresight. We don't know how to modernise. It was the same way that 10, 15 years after he had been good, we were still chasing Rafa Benitez. We have no idea. We do not know. We do not notice modern trends. We do not know how football is going. And I don't know. I don't know how this ends. And I've now found myself so... Hopefully, almost the only glimmer of hope that I've got is that somebody else on the board, it might be a Trip Smith or it might be someone like that, looks at their own shares. I mean, we're about to lose a lot of money here if this carries on. And actually someone does do a hostile takeover, which is possible because the gold shares are there and they're ready to be bought. The idea of getting a director of football was a really, really good one because it even though it didn't work out, it would have allowed West Ham, David Sullivan, to step away from what was going on. He's not. He's back. He's back in charge. And there is no surprise that the club are in the state that they are. Whether it's him or Brady has said it, we are on the floor. We're absolutely on the floor. But the fact that it gets spoken about with such detachment is very, very frustrating for me. Because they say the club's on the floor as if they had nothing to do with it. They've just walked past it and they've looked down and they've seen it and they've stumbled upon it. Oh, look. The club's on the floor. How's that happened? That's what it looks like, and it is a frustrating thing to behold. Because I also believe the club is on the floor. I believe they're right in that. But no one, as much as I think that we've got people managing the team, coaching the team, that are probably and possibly not up to the standard, and I hope to be wrong on that. The fact that they were appointed in the first place, and the guy before them, Lopetegui, was appointed in the first place, this is all the fault of the people at the top of the club. And if we are on the floor, it's their fault.